So just a little bit about the film to begin. Let me introduce Caroline Abu Saďda from SOS Méditerranée, Safa, Msehli from IOM. Both have extensive experience in this exact topic. Me less so, certainly from Geneva, a lot less so. So maybe you could just start with just a brief discussion about the film and the importance of film when it comes to telling these difficult stories. Because I'm sure, like most people sitting at home in front of the television, if you do that anymore, you've seen all the news stories. You've seen the bobbing rubber dinghies, overcrowded rubber dinghies, and maybe countless times. And maybe you've turned away. And I think that's the big problem with so much media these days. Things are treated as news, and it's painted on our screens, and we turn away. And what I think, for my part, the extraordinary success of this film, even though some of you may have found the beginning slow, culturally odd, strange, I think what it does is it brings the art of storytelling to this extraordinary event that's happening all around us and that we're not paying nearly enough attention to. And without storytelling, without films, without this level of filmmaking, it's very, very difficult for people to get beyond the numbers, beyond the partisan opinions that are ripping apart our societies. And make no mistake about it, they're ripping apart our societies, and it's not getting better. I mean, there's so many, for me, so many extraordinary parts to this film. We could talk about it all night, but the symbolism of the young African boy, the symbolism of the extraordinary bravery of the lead protagonist in the movie, and the seeming callousness of the globalized North. And I think more than that, what really comes home to me is the elephant in the room in this entire picture is the gross inequality that we have today. I mean, if you just recall the opening scenes and the technology and the aid workers running around and the EMS can't do enough to help these two boy racers who've probably taken some kind of alcohol and smacked their cars up. And then we compare that to the total lack of resources and, in fact, maybe the holding back of resources. That's what I'll leave these two experts to talk about. So I, for my part, thought it was like an extraordinarily powerful film, and kudos to the filmmaker Wolfgang Fischer and to the two extraordinary performances by Suzanne Wolf and by Gideon Odur. But we're going to have a quick chat, but we're not going to let you away. We need you to participate, and I'm sure you're keen to do so. So I'm going to start by asking Caroline, just to give your initial reactions and help us a little bit. And maybe when you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your what you've been doing in the last couple of years, because it will be fascinating to people here.
Good evening. So I'm one of the people who thought that after 20 minutes it was a bit weird, and I stopped because I had the link before. And then I saw the entire movie tonight, and I've seen few movies on this topic, and it's definitely a very powerful one. I'm not sure she's heroic, though, and I think that's the beauty of the movie, is that she's not heroic, and it shows that she's in front of the dilemma and she doesn't know what to do. And that's probably what I thought was the most interesting in this. What I feel is, it seems that every time I comment a movie here, I end up saying that I feel ashamed, and it's something that because it's not only a movie, it's still happening every single day. The lack of rescues, the lack of means, the lack of willingness to see what's happening, and that's something. So I would be really interested to know your opinions as well on what does that kind of movie trigger in you, and it's because it's more somehow the face-à-face between her and the dilemma she's facing rather than the boy, even though the boy is a fantastic actor, but it's more how do you deal with the lack of rescue and how do you deal with this dilemma. So it's more this that is interesting, I think. About me, so I'm the director of SOS Méditerranée. We're the organization which charters the Ocean Viking. We used to charter the Aquarius. You may have heard about both boats. We disembarked 60 people today, actually at noon in Pozzallo in Italy. And since the beginning of the operation of both boats, it started in February 2016, we've rescued over 30,000 people. And I remember one search and rescue team member used to say it's 30,000 people and it's 30,000 stories. And it's true. And this movie shows one story, but there's thousands of stories, and that's something that we should not forget.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Leo Tolstoy, the famous Russian novelist, War and Peace, etc., famously said, all good literature is one of two stories. A person goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. And I think that's the importance of this film, is that it's telling a superbly important story that will hopefully live with you for a long time and bring this incredibly important issue that's this I don't want to characterize it but this this slaughter of innocence that's happening on our shores, with appeals in extraordinary work by civil society, by NGOs like SOS Mediterranean and others, and a political class that's convulsed. And this is maybe the essential problem we're facing these days. Safa, tell us what you've experienced tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been doing, and what your perspective from Libya.
Yeah, so my name is Safa. I work with the International Organization for Migration here in Geneva. Prior to that, I was in Libya, and I guess this is why I was chosen to speak about this. To me, the movie resonates a lot. I mean, despite the technicalities and the struggle that the character goes through, it also resonates with a very realistic issue that we're seeing nowadays, and that we've seen for the past few years in the Mediterranean, and especially the central Mediterranean, with thousands of people taking these journeys on often unseaworthy vessels, being trafficked to sea by smugglers in whether Libya or Tunisia at the moment. And these people that are fleeing, whether it's poverty or conflict, they're now being faced with a hardening attitude and an outright hostility that is now being also reflected in policy, and I think that's also the dangerous part. From my experience in Libya, I've spoken to hundreds of people, and countless people tell you of what they go through. And again, I echo what Leonard said. This is one story of one person, but what we must not forget is that this is also a story of thousands of people. What happened here on this boat and the death or the drowning of these people is also symptomatic of 19,000 deaths that we've recorded in the central Mediterranean since 2015 alone. It's also symbolic of hundreds and thousands of people that are being returned to what we believe are unsafe ports, that are being returned to detention and to difficult conditions. For me, that's what I see the importance of the movie is. It brings to light a very realistic issue, although the circumstances are obviously different. It's not the same area and it's not the same people, probably not same nationalities. But again, it reflects a lot of what we see now that is definitely relevant to Europe at the moment in the central Mediterranean and the Mediterranean.
Thank you, Safa. So let's throw it open to the audience. I'm sure you have many questions for our experts. Please.
I see one right there.
Over here on the left.
Hello, I'm Peter from Uganda. I'm very happy to be here. I'll try to be respectful. Please accept my opinions. I think she was very naive. I think she created a very big problem for that boy because his sister's dead and, well, he's going to live a very troublesome life, probably rejected, may even commit suicide at some point. I think she created a big problem for him, and sometimes death is the worst things than death. And I think, for me, what hurt me the most is that while she's here on the ocean having her joyride, politicians in her country are making policies that she's probably not aware of. And it represents an apathy in this generation towards government and what governments do. People don't care, people don't read the news. They're busy with Instagram and Facebook. While their politicians are supporting military industrial economies to go and pillage these nations and propagate conflicts. So, I mean, while Trump is selling guns to Saudi Arabia, which is terrorizing Yemen, people in America are following Kim Kardashian. And then they're probably going to do something like this and feel like heroes. Yet the real heroism is standing up in your country to your politicians and what they're doing and their policies. But no one's courageous enough to do that. They'd rather do this. So I try to be respectful, but...
Very much so. Thank you for your remarks. Yeah, excellent. We were just, I think somebody over on the side, if I may, in the third row.
Can I quickly say something?
Course,
Well,
absolutely, yeah.
I actually agree with you, the fact that people need to stand up here and to actually do something here is probably like the conclusion of the movie. But that's why I was saying I would be interested to see, because it's easy to like switch off when it's the TV, or it's easy to just discount any kind of stories. After an hour and a half like that, it's a bit more complicated, and it's the use, because, and that's why I said earlier that for me she's not a hero, and we're not. I mean, that's her duty basically to. Where it's more questionable is she's basically waiting for the entire thing to collapse, and then she goes and she just checked the last one that is not dead on the boat. But what was interesting is the fact that all the boats that were around did not respond to the rescue signal, which is a breach of law, and they're basically using death of people as a way to control borders as well. And that's probably here is more symbolic than in the central Mediterranean, but it's something that is happening every single day. And that's something on which citizens here should actually be concerned with. And I agree that it's also the policies of governments here and the impact that citizens, just by voting would be a very good beginning, can actually have, and that's fundamental.
Just to follow up on that very quickly, and I also, I mean, definitely not in a position to call anybody a hero. I think a lot of people who risk their lives for their improvement or for their families are definitely the heroes. But I think it's also important to recognize that the movie brings to light this particular issue, the fact that this attitude that we used to see outside in the streets is now translated into policy, and this policy is definitely affecting the lives of thousands of people who are taking this journey. The one thing I would disagree with that you said is that every life matters, and when you work in these circumstances, you realize that saving the boy, traumatizing as it may have been, the experience, to us, every life matters, and every death is one too many. So when you have the ability to save one life, to me, that's still something worth celebrating. You're not a hero, but you're at least taking action, even if it takes you a while to take that action.
Thank you. So maybe we return to this young lady here.
Hi, my name is Paula, and I'm an intern at the ILO. So my comment, I would say, is that I do agree with you, actually, on the fact that, I mean, she's not 100% hero, but she tried her best, probably because she doesn't have any experience. And on my personal experience, for example, I did my master's thesis on this subject exactly, where all my participants were refugees from Syria, and they arrived to the EU and especially Belgium on this way, on the boat. I mean, they didn't know each other, most of them, but they happened to come to Europe in the same month and the same year. I mean, of course, in different boats, and they were also coming on boats that 2 of them actually almost drowned. And I mean, my comment for this movie, I would say, is that it was, I mean, the authorities or the people who were competent to actually come and save them, they didn't really care. I mean, to be honest, I don't think they really wanted to get involved. And I think in this movie, like the reality is portrayed, like all the stories that I've heard from my participants, for example, they were saying also that they had to call the authorities, the Turkish or Italian authorities or the Greek authorities, like many times and for many hours, and they have seen people dying on the boats that they came to the European Union. I mean, they said like they feel really lucky that they have made it, but they have seen hundreds of people dying. So I think, to me, in this movie actually does bring the reality of what is going on, and especially the way the authorities act and neglect. They just turn their backs from the situation and the refugees.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can just, is there another question in the room? And we can then take some answers. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alex. In this film, this lady had a decision to make. And the problem for her was getting close to the vessel was going to cause more problems of people jumping overboard and maybe drowning. And she knows that her boat cannot handle that number of people. So it is not about her being a hero or not a hero. It's just what do you do? I don't know what I would do in this situation. But my question to Carolyn is, don't you think that your actions are in a way the same way, would be similar to her getting close to that boat and having people jump overboard and try to get to her boat and be rescued? If you were not out there rescuing people, maybe you would not form an incentive for people to try to make that trip. Just a question.
I have an answer.
You surprised me.
No, I told you that would be the first question. Thank you, because that was the question before. So no, actually there has been research, even funded by the National Swiss Research Fund, that shows that there's absolutely no correlation between the presence of NGOs at sea and the departure of boats. So people are actually leaving detention centers, and I think you could give a hint on what exactly is going on in those detention centers in Libya. So briefly, torture, rape, ill treatment, etc., etc. But she's been there, so she can give us much more insight. And the correlation is between more like weather conditions rather than NGO presence. So when you have NGOs or no NGOs, people still try to leave Libya. The only difference is the death rate, that you die much more when there's no NGOs than when you have. The second thing is that the entire system that has been in place, criminalizing rescue at sea, is also has a direct impact on the actions of merchant vessels, because it's an obligation to render assistance to anyone in distress at sea, as is perfectly shown in the movie. And we've seen that because, so for example, last year there was a merchant vessel from the Maersk company who actually rescued people and had to wait 5 days in front of an Italian port before he was able to disembark people. This has created the fact that merchant vessels now are not responding to their legal obligations anymore. They're just trying to avoid any place where there could be potential rescues to do, which is completely illegal. So it's not, people will try to get out of an active conflict. Libya, since April, is again considered in an active conflict, so the people leaving Libya should actually be granted international protection. They will continue to leave, whether we're there or not, whether Maersk or MSC or whichever merchant vessel is there. Using death as a way to control arrivals in Europe is probably not what I would consider a proper way to act. So no, I don't think we did the same thing. I don't think we do the same thing. And it's a bit, as you say, we are facing a choice. Either we go there and we actually try to save people, and we don't succeed all the time. I mean, some people were on board the Aquarius in the room. They can tell you as well that it's not during rescues. Rescues are a very tricky time, especially when it's bad weather, when you have massive waves, when it's at dark, and when you have the boat, which is already started sinking, and you have to make a choice between, are you saving this person who's already drowning, or are you saving the one next to him? It's not 100% success, but we still think that it's better to actually save them than let them die at sea while we wait for a political answer to happen.
I think also we mustn't underestimate. I mean, just to build on that, we shouldn't underestimate the power of witnessing. I mean, clearly, if a trawler goes down with no witnesses, that's 300 people drowned that nobody is recording. And the presence of in particular, the NGO rescue boats they're bearing witness to something that maybe others would prefer we didn't see or hear about. So there's another layer to it, I think. But Safa, please tell us a little bit about.
Just to follow up actually on the same point that she mentioned, this research, a very recent research actually that came out in Italy. I think it was Matteo Via. I don't have the numbers exactly with me, but I'll give you examples. Operation Aquarius, the MSF boat that was conducting search and rescue for the NGO starting 2016, was suspended in 2018, I believe.
September, and then we stopped the charter in December.
So we had, and I was in Libya at the time, and we had months without the presence of any NGO ships at sea. And I can tell you for a fact that numbers back me up when I say departures from Libya did not decrease. They stayed steady. So trying to narrow down departures to one reason or to the actual crucial presence of life-saving efforts, may I add, in the absence of state-led search and rescue capacity. The EU does not have any search and rescue capacity in the Mediterranean at the moment. So reducing the presence of life-saving efforts to a pull factor, I think, is very unfair, because that negates a lot of other factors, the fact that people are fleeing poverty, the fact that people are fleeing violence, that refugees the numbers that we see of Eritreans and people from South Sudan and others that are taking these dangerous journeys, it's not because there's a boat waiting, it's because the conditions are too difficult, or the conditions are too harsh. And speaking for Libya, I spent so much time in detention centers in Libya to tell you that those are not people where anybody should be detained. We've documented abuse, we've documented torture, we've documented disappearances. We cannot account for certain people that have been returned to Libya. So with all due respect, I don't think reducing the efforts of saving people to a pull factor is fair to either them or to the thousands of lives that they saved.
Thank you. If I may say, I think the question is an important one, because it's one that's articulated every other day, and it's more than important that we discuss it, and you're the unlucky one who has to do so, but it's good of you to have done so. Exactly. I think it's very important because it is part of the debate, and it's important that we hear these two, very articulate responses.
But just if anybody's curious about this research, it's actually online and it's on Twitter. You can find it on the researchers' page everywhere. I think UN Migration Twitter also shared it. It's about dissecting the myth of the pull factor and its relation to the numbers of people that are departing from Libya.
Thank you. There's a gentleman right here.
Yeah, my daughter has spent the past year in Moria refugee camp in Lesbos Island, trying to give legal aid to refugees. I call her regularly. She usually has about 50 to 100 persons in front of her office. She can handle 3 cases legal aid per day for a number that is way over. I have much respect for what you do to save people, and I was very interested that you said it doesn't increase the problem. But basically, and I of course get arguments with my own daughter about this, there is a continent with a demographic explosion, there is conflict all over. Is there any consensus on real solutions on this migration problem? Is there any, because I see the drama, I understand the human aspect of it, but the disequilibrium seems so huge to me that we have to find some consensus worldwide on how to handle this.
May I just say, on this issue, and it's a very fraught issue, it's worth just recalling the numbers are actually quite small. The numbers seem very large because it appears in front of you on the television screen, but the numbers of people trying to cross by these methods is actually not as big as we imagine it is. And I think the important question really to ask is what's driving people? Why is there no, why invest so much in keeping people out rather than in making things better? Now, undoubtedly, the European Union has, for all the things you might think it does bad, it does a lot of good, and it spends a lot of European money on development projects. Okay, it's a bit late, it could have happened before, but there's no question there's been a wake-up call at the highest echelons of the European Union. I'm not going to stand and defend any of their behavior, but there is undoubtedly an issue of economic development that's driving this. Caroline?
They also spend a lot of money on weapons.
Oh, yeah.
But just to answer your question, and I think you're going to have a very interesting Christmas with your daughter, because I can imagine the discussions you're going to have. For us, and it's a parti pris that we took, there are, at the moment, people trying to flee an active conflict, Libya. They are at sea, and basically, if we don't rescue them, they're going to die. That's very simple. So it's a basic yes or no question. Are we still going out there and trying to rescue whomever we can, or are we not? For the moment, we've decided that it's still worth it, whatever the reasons for them to go at sea, by the way. That's not even, because I also have, usually the second question after yours is, how do you make the difference between migrants and refugees when you're on the boat? And I always laugh because I'm like, yeah, so usually when we have a dinghy, we look at them and we say, so who's from where? And so who's a migrant? No, so you stay behind. We only take refugees on board. I'm kidding, but it's for us. It's a no. It's not a question as such. They need to be rescued. Full stop. We're like 5 people in Switzerland working for SOS Méditerranée. So it's basically not us who are going to change the situation in Africa. Let's face it, or in the Middle East, which is what I think interesting in saying the EU is funding a lot of development projects. Yes, I'm sure there's a lot of people who have seen a development project being funded by the EU in the Middle East or elsewhere. It's not exactly very effective or either efficient, but that's really not the issue for me at the moment.
We raised the controversial issue of heroism at the beginning, and I described the young lady in the boat as heroic. I think any woman who goes to sea in a 12-meter boat is heroic. I think what you do in rescuing people at sea is heroic. But we can agree to differ on that. There's somebody in the back who wanted to ask. Did I catch you? Yeah, please. Yes, right here.
Hi, I'm Tony, and I just have a quick question for both of you, because you do have some experience a bit different in the migrants crisis. I think one of the dramas of this movie is, of course, the migrants itself and the boat sinking, etc., but it's also the human who is saying, no, we don't help them. So my question is, in your positions, what you face in reality, who are those people who say no?
So you're referring to the merchant vessel that said that based on their company policy they're not allowed to intervene,
Which is illegal, by the way. She's right.
It's illegal, and it's against the law of the sea to do that. And I have not seen personally, and there might be, I have not seen cases where merchant vessels in the central Mediterranean refuse to rescue people. It actually happened quite a few times in recent years. But saying no to rescuing people in general is what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, don't you have people in offices, in some governments, I don't know,
So
saying, no, we don't do that, we don't give more money, we don't, I don't know. Basically, people not helping you to do your job.
If I may, I think we can absolutely condemn this, but I think this audience can also wallow in a degree of self-comfort. I mean, Angela Merkel did the most extraordinary and heroic thing in accepting 1 million refugees. Look at the price she's paying. It's her society, it's our societies who are turning on these decisions. And I think it behooves all of us to get involved, to raise awareness, and to help our politicians understand that there's a price for doing it. So we can, of course, imagine the gormless idiot who decided not to come and rescue because it's more than his or her job's worth. But it's actually a societal problem that we are allowing these deaths to happen without consequences.
I think also, I mean, it is true we're lacking a lot on search and rescue capacity, and evidence for that could be made through the hundreds of deaths recorded this year. For the 6th year in a row, we've recorded 1,000 deaths in the Mediterranean, and those are all avoidable, unnecessary deaths. Obviously, we're not trying to prevent death at sea, we're trying to reduce it as much as possible, but we are lacking in those capacity, and evidence could be made for that. I think it's very important that state search and rescue vessels that have played an important role, especially after 2013 and 2015 through Mare Nostrum and through Operation Sophia, I think it's very important to resume those operations and to give people more of a chance to be saved, because as you see, these vessels, they're never seaworthy vessels. They're not sent by a friend. They're put on these rubber dinghies that are basically about to drown by smugglers and human traffickers who prey on their weaknesses and who take their money and set them up to fail. So if that's what you mean, yes, I do believe that we're lacking a lot on capacity to rescue people in the Mediterranean. If you're trying to get me to point a finger at anybody, I'm not going to do that.
I can do it. No, but just to answer previously on search and rescue in the Mediterranean, 2013 you have hundreds of dead near Lampedusa. It's the first visit of the Pope. There's a massive speech on we are children of migrants, blah blah. No one should be left to die at sea, etc., etc. Wake-up call for the European Union. Italy starts a Mare Nostrum operation, which from 2013 to 2014 rescues at least 100 to 150,000 people. And they have to stop the operation under pressure by the EU, which says, you're doing a pull factor, and if you had to stop your operation, people will not come anymore. That was 2014. 2014, 2015, there's no one at sea. And 2015, because of the death rate that skyrocketed and reached active conflict level, some NGOs decided to start operation. And then you have, from 2015 to 2017, a few NGOs operating at sea, which does not, just a reminder, NGOs are responsible for 30 to 40% of rescues at sea, which means 60 to 70% are actually being done by merchant vessels or by, at that time, some of the European Navy ships who were still operating at sea. Operation Sophia, which was a European operation, never had the aim of saving people. I have an email from an official which says, "Ma'am, we're not, that's not what we do. What we do is to try and tackle the smuggling. And our targets are the boats." We were afraid that they would actually target the boats with people on board, which never happened. But the design of the Operation Sophia was extremely weird. And tackling the smuggling without tackling, boats at sea was a bit weird to everyone. But that's being stopped at the moment as well. And we've always said, we're only here as a band-aid on a wooden leg. The French expression is a bit weird, but it's quite... It's just to say, we've always asked for a European mission of search and rescue at sea. We've always said the day you actually put back vessels at sea to operate search and rescue operations, we will stop. We're not here to last. And seriously, I mean, that would be the best day of my life when I can shut down SOS Méditerranée here, because it's like probably the most frustrating job at the moment, because you see it's going on, nothing. I mean, and you only discuss the pull factor thing. Sorry, but it's at some point it's a bit like let's collectively do something. So it's not only, and it's true, it's not only states. It's at some point. Citizens are also responsible for the way they vote and for the governments they actually elect. And it's also your responsibility, it's our responsibility, collective responsibility to actually do something.
Thank you.
Sorry,
well done.
was my,
There's a gentleman, I think, at the very back in a pink hat. Woman, excuse me, my eyes. I haven't got my glasses on.
I don't think gentlemen wear pink hats.
Well, nowadays.
So I found the movie amazingly frustrating. I really don't know how a boat works, but my guess is that any boat at sea today can, through satellite, connect to something beyond just the Coast Guard and this other person who doesn't want to do anything. And what you have to do, and I found it so frustrating. Why isn't she making this known to other people? As soon as it starts hitting the newspaper, then they start reacting.
She should have tweeted.
Yeah, she should have tweeted. And my reaction to the Coast Guard knowing that these people are there and dying and not coming is they would rather come when they're already dead. And I want to say to everybody in this room, the way we live is not only causing our climate change, it is also causing the problem in Africa. And the way we consume, the way our governments behave, and the way they need to exploit other areas in the world in order to continue feeding us and our consumption is what leads to this. Everybody here has to go beyond influencing the politician to get a law to rescue people. They are a symptom of something horribly serious that happens in any country when they discover oil, when they have anything that we want. And then the politicians there start getting bought by people here, and you see the difference in the lifestyle being seriously damaged, and then people getting very poor as others fill their pockets. We are the ones who are consuming. If we change the way we live, we not only will impact climate change, but we will also help if we can affect with what we do, how we vote, and how we consume, what our politicians do about exploiting Africa, exploiting different areas in the world that lead to this problem.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? There we go. One right here. Rather than a statement, we have a question. Statements are good.
I'm an executive coach, and I work in a lot of organizations, NGOs, and one of the problems I see are silos. And sitting here after watching a highly emotional movie, I feel compelled to do something, but I think a small drop is not enough for me. I know there are experts who are good at various elements along the chain. Is there an organization, a movement, something that links IOM together with all the people who are going to accept the refugees? Is there somebody?
It's called the United Nations.
I work at the United Nations too. I think that may not quite be enough, although it's wonderful. When I moved here, I wanted to link all the UN organizations to have a common goal. We're getting there. But there has to be some organization or movement with money that has enough people to actually make a difference. I've seen what happens when refugees come to Switzerland. They're not given a language, they don't know the laws, they do things that we don't like. What can we do to really help?
Well, I'm glad you didn't suggest forming a committee, because that wouldn't really do very much. But I'm just going to throw something out to you, which is that we like to blast the European Union, good reason perhaps. We like to blast political leaders. We don't really look at ourselves that much. But so how many of you here used the WhatsApp today? Did any of you use WhatsApp today? Yeah. Are you aware that it's an encrypted messaging system? Are you aware that it's used massively by smugglers as they shepherd their charges across unseen border posts and into these terrible boats? The charges don't, the guys who are paying, the women who are paying for this trip don't know that they're getting into a leaky vessel. They think they're getting into a ship. Do we bring the tech companies to heel on this? When there are false Facebook pages set up to bring people to, to be smuggled, do we bring these tech companies to account, or do we just click on and like our next friend? I mean, we have a lot of power ourselves, and yet it's easy to say, it's the government, it's the European Union, let's have more Brexit, whatever. But we can do a lot ourselves.
Yes, sorry if I may,
Sure.
it's what I said earlier on being a citizen includes the citizen consumer. I mean, it's not only the European Union or the GAFA, but it's how you handle your own government and the way you consume, consume.
Sure.
So it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to handle that as well.
This young lady in row 5, I think, and somebody else? Is it?
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate whatever you have done. I just want to point out the point that the people who are sailing to EU or to USA count less than 10% of those refugees. 90% of those refugees, never to say those internal displaced people, they are still in Africa, in Mid East, and how we can better help them. Because the one thing I feel very frustrating is when I told my friend the first time about refugee, their first reaction is a migration crisis in EU, in USA, but actually it's those peaceful, relatively peaceful countries in Africa are holding those more people there, refugees there. Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, just name it. How can we help them? So in this story, the German girl even have a very equipped sailing boat. But for those African countries themselves may not have such a boat. They only have the other fish boat, which just not leaking like that.
Thank you. It's a very good point. The number of refugees in the world is, I think, around 26 million. The number of internally displaced people, and they've been there for protracted periods, is over 45 million. So this is another sort of hidden drama, and they're not going anywhere. We've got time for a couple of more questions. So you've had one, so we're going to ask this gentleman at the back. and see if we can come back to you. We have time for two more.
Thank
There's
you.
A woman right at the back in the yellow jacket. That's one more, and maybe that's it.
Thank you. My name is Derek. I represent the International Fellowship of Reconciliation at the UN here. I just have one quick question, and that is there any way of prosecuting some of these widespread breaches of law of the sea that are going on with people refusing to rescue, given that this is supported by state and even by EU policy? Thank you.
There are actually a couple of cases against the EU and against Italy that you might be interested in following in this regard.
There's one very famous case which is called the Left to Die boat, which left the coast of Libya in 2011. There were 74 people on board, I think, and they were literally left to die. Only 4 survived. And it has been documented that many ships were close to, as she showed on in the movie, many ships were close to this embarkation. There were helicopters, planes, and they've been able to retrace which ship, which helicopter, which plane, at what time, when, where, how. And 4 states are being prosecuted: France, Italy, Spain, and Belgium, because some of those assets belong to their armies, and there are other cases, but it's extremely long. And it has to be very well documented, and you have to have someone part of the boat who's ready to go because it's extremely long and painful, and a lot of people don't want to go through this judicial issue.
Where are the prosecutions taking place?
At the moment, it's at national level. And once this is going to be discarded, because most probably it's going to be discarded at national level, then they can go to the European Human Rights Court.
Which is not to be underestimated. The European Court of Human Rights is taken very seriously by governments.
Yeah, for me, I just want to check about the... long time ago, there was this resettlement issue for people to be resettled in Australia, to be resettled in Canada, to be resettled somewhere else in Europe. But it seems it has been stopped. Like we have refugees, many refugees in South Sudanese refugees in Uganda. The number keeps on increasing as the Ugandan government is not even interested to see peace in South Sudan, because they have interest also. Their business is going on well as Ethiopia. I could say the African Union, they are not really interested to have peace in South Sudan. So where is this issue of resettlement? Because many of the South Sudanese had been resettled in Australia, in Canada. At least they are doing well, and they are the one now helping those refugees who are in the camps. People like us here in Europe, we have our salaries, but it continues helping the people back home, not even in South Sudan, but in the camps. This is one issue. The other issue is, why do we have many people now coming to Europe? It's most of the time after Gaddafi was killed. And I would say that the Western world has that big responsibility, really. Yeah. They are not interested in making peace in the South, the so-called South, by at least stopping giving money to the corrupt leaders. If really those leaders who are corrupt until today are to be treated like the way Gaddafi was taken out, probably there might have been a change.
Okay, thank you very much. So just quickly on the resettlement issue. So, I mean, it's worth noting that resettlement is a policy for the most vulnerable refugees, and it tends to never go beyond 1%. And part of that is because, you know, refugees want to go home and hope to go home. So taking them to a completely new life is a big game change for them. Although resettlement is enormously important, and IOM with UNHCR work hand in glove all over the world, and increasingly outside the US, and increasingly outside Canada to do that. On the issue of why can people, the issue of coming to Europe, I mean, it's a big issue. We advocate for what is called in the jargon legal pathways. finding routes for people to come into Europe to have a career, because guess what? Europe is getting older, populations are, tapping out, and you can't run a global economy like Germany's without young people to be in the factories. But that's an issue that's at a political dead stop. And I think that's an area that needs to be explored a lot more. You can't continue your prosperity. There's only so much you can robotize and automate. You actually need hard-working people, and people want to work. Did either of you?
Yeah, I mean, basically what Leonard said on resettlement, it is very sad. 1% of people who have asylum claims get ultimately resettled. And this depends largely on states offering resettlement spots. It is a very small number, and thousands of other people definitely need international protection or are seeking international protection. As Leonard said, one of the largest issues that IOM is also working on is the fact that there are no more, or there's a lack in legal pathways for people to reach, whether it is that they want to continue their studies or that they want to work abroad. The procedures have become very complicated and long and unaffordable for a lot of people. And that's why we see them risking their lives on these journeys, whether through the desert or through sea.
Thank you very much. So I think we've been, it's time out. So you've been an extraordinary, great audience. Just if there's anything very quick that you'd like to say, Caroline, or are you?
Thank you.
Yeah? Safa?
Yeah, thank you for bearing with us.
So if I may, I just want to say an enormous thank you to Jacqueline Coté, who's been a tremendous supporter of our little film festival. I want to thank again Amanda Nero and the entire team of the IOM Communications who are... She's right there at the back. So thank you very much for coming tonight and for engaging.